Welcome back, friends. This is Jordy. If you're up late and staring at the ceiling, I've got some scary stories to match your mood. Tell me in the comments where you are and what time it is. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get started. The first text arrived at 10:17 p.m. I was curled on the sofa, halfway through a documentary about deep-sea creatures. The apartment's silent save for the narrator's hushed voice and the occasional gurgle of the fish tank. The phone vibrated, and I glanced at the screen. You just took a sip of chamomile tea. My blood ran cold. The message was from my own number. I stared at it, the blue light of the screen reflecting in my wide, unblinking eyes. A prank? Some kind of glitch? I checked my phone log. Nothing. No outgoing messages. I dismissed it, attributing it to some bizarre technological anomaly. I'd read about stranger things happening, but the unease lingered, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I turned up the volume on the TV, trying to drown out the unsettling silence of the apartment. At 10:32 p.m., another text. Now you're scratching your left arm, just above the elbow. This time, panic flared. I looked down at my arm. A faint red mark was forming where I'd unconsciously scratched. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't a prank. This was something else entirely. I tried to call my own number. The call went straight to voicemail. My own voice, calm and reassuring, filled the small apartment, a stark contrast to the terror gripping me. I hung up, my hand shaking. I live in a small, one-bedroom apartment in a relatively new building. Security is tight. Keycard access, cameras in the lobby and hallways. It's supposed to be safe. But now, safe felt like a cruel joke. I started pacing, my mind racing. Who could be doing this? How could they be doing this? I checked the locks on the door and windows, even though I knew they were secure. It was a futile gesture, a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control. The next text arrived at 10:48 p.m. You're looking at the framed photo on the bookshelf. The one of you and your mother at the beach. You're smiling, but your eyes are sad. That one hit me hard. The photo was old, taken years before my mother passed away. It was a happy memory, tinged with the bittersweet ache of loss. How could anyone know I was looking at it? How could they know what I was feeling? I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. I needed to get out of there. I needed to be around people. But as I reached for the doorknob, another text arrived. Don't leave. It's safer inside. I froze, my hand hovering over the cold metal. Safer inside? That was insane. This apartment was the source of my terror. But the message, it was so confident, so certain. A seed of doubt began to sprout in my mind. What if leaving was exactly what they wanted me to do? I hesitated, then slowly backed away from the door. I was trapped. Trapped in my own apartment. Trapped in my own mind. The texts continued, each one more personal, more disturbing than the last. They described my thoughts, my fears, my deepest insecurities. They knew things about me that no one else could possibly know. Things I hadn't even admitted to myself. You still blame yourself for what happened to Michael. That one made me gasp. Michael was my childhood friend. He died in a car accident when we were teenagers. I'd been driving. It wasn't my fault, not really. But the guilt had haunted me for years. How could they know about Michael? How could they use it against me? I sank to the floor, my body trembling. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like I was being dissected alive. My apartment, once a sanctuary, had become a prison. The walls seemed to be closing in, the air growing thick and suffocating. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe my phone had been hacked. Maybe someone had installed spyware. But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't true. This was something else, something darker, something more insidious. I spent the next few hours huddled in the corner of the living room, watching the door, waiting for the next text. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the building, every rustle of the wind outside the window sent shivers down my spine. The texts became more frequent, more aggressive. They taunted me, mocked me, threatened me. They knew my weaknesses, my fears, my vulnerabilities. They were inside my head. You're afraid of the dark. You're afraid of being alone. You're afraid of what's hiding in the shadows. I wanted to scream, but I was too terrified to make a sound. I felt like I was losing my mind. Reality was blurring. The line between what was real and what was imagined, dissolving into a swirling vortex of fear. As the night wore on, the texts began to focus on the apartment itself. They described the layout, the furniture, the objects on the shelves. They knew every detail, every nook and cranny. The chipped teacup on the kitchen counter. You got it from your grandmother. The faded stain on the carpet in the bedroom. Red wine. A bad night. The loose floorboard in the hallway. It creaks when you step on it. Then, at 4:17 a.m., the text that shattered what little remained of my sanity. I'm watching you from the closet. My blood turned to ice. I slowly, agonizingly, turned my head towards the closet door. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible within. I could hear my own ragged breathing, the frantic pounding of my heart. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but look. But I was paralyzed by fear, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling beneath me. I took a tentative step towards the closet, then another. Each step was an eternity, each breath a struggle. As I reached the closet door, I hesitated. What was waiting for me inside? What horrors lay hidden in the darkness? I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and yanked the door open. The closet was empty. Just clothes, shoes, a few boxes. Nothing else. Relief washed over me. So intense, it almost brought me to my knees. It was a false alarm, a cruel trick. But I was safe. For now. I backed away from the closet, my eyes darting around the room. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched, that I was still being hunted. I checked the entire apartment, every room, every corner. Under the bed, behind the curtains, inside the cabinets, nothing. I was alone, or at least, I appeared to be. I collapsed back onto the sofa, exhausted and terrified. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to trust. I didn't even know if I could trust my own mind. As dawn began to break, painting the sky with streaks of pale light, I received another text. You think you're safe now? Think again. I'm right behind you. I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. There was nothing there, just the empty space behind the sofa. But then I saw it, reflected in the darkened screen of the TV. A figure standing in the hallway, just behind me. A figure that looked exactly like me. But it wasn't me. It was a distorted, grotesque version of me. Its eyes were black and empty, its mouth twisted into a malevolent grin. It raised its hand, and in its hand was a knife. I screamed, a primal, guttural sound that tore through the silence of the apartment. I lunged forward, grabbing the remote control and throwing it at the reflection. The screen shattered, the image disappearing in a shower of sparks and broken glass. I scrambled to my feet, my mind reeling. What was that? A hallucination? A ghost? A demon? I didn't know, and I didn't want to know. I ran to the door, fumbling with the keys. I had to get out of there. I had to escape. As I opened the door, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing in the hallway, just a few feet away, was the figure from the reflection. The distorted, grotesque version of me. It smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Hello," it said, its voice a distorted echo of my own. "I've been waiting for you." I slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. I backed away from the door, my eyes wide with terror. It was inside the apartment. It was inside my head. I was trapped. I ran to the bedroom, slamming the door behind me and locking it. I pushed the dresser in front of the door, creating a makeshift barricade. It wouldn't hold for long, but it would buy me some time. I looked around the room, desperately searching for a weapon. A lamp, a book, anything. My eyes landed on the mirror on the wall. My reflection stared back at me, pale and terrified. And then, my reflection smiled. The smile widened, becoming more grotesque, more malevolent. The eyes turned black. The mouth twisted into a horrifying grin. It was in the mirror. I screamed again, a long, drawn-out scream that echoed through the apartment. I grabbed the lamp and smashed it against the mirror. The glass shattered, the reflection disappearing in a million tiny pieces. But it was too late. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned around, and there it was, standing right behind me. The distorted, grotesque version of me. It raised the knife, its eyes filled with a cold, empty malice. "It's time," it whispered, its voice a distorted echo of my own. "It's time to become one." I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. But the blow never came. Instead, I felt a strange sensation, a merging, a blending. My consciousness began to fade, my thoughts becoming muddled and confused. I was losing myself. I was becoming it. And then, everything went black. I woke up in the apartment. It was still dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the city outside the window. I sat up, my head throbbing. I felt disoriented, confused. What had happened? Was it all a dream? I looked around the room. Everything seemed normal. The furniture was in its place. The walls were bare. The floor was clean. But then I saw it. A small, almost imperceptible change. My reflection in the window. It was smiling. A slow, deliberate smile that sent shivers down my spine. I reached up and touched my face. My fingers traced the contours of my jaw, the curve of my lips. And then I realized it wasn't my face anymore. It was its face, the distorted, grotesque face from the reflection. I was it. I had become it. I stood up and walked towards the door. I opened it and stepped out into the hallway. I knew what I had to do. There were others who were vulnerable, others who were afraid, others who were waiting to be consumed. I would find them. I would become them. And then, we would all be one. The texts started again. This time, not on my phone, but on the phone of a young woman named Sarah, living just a few blocks away. "You just checked the locks on your door. Smart, but it won't help. I know you're afraid of the dark. I'm already inside." The cycle begins anew. The horror continues, spreading like a virus, consuming everything in its path. The apartment remains, a silent, empty shell, waiting for its next victim. And somewhere, in the shadows, I am waiting too. Always waiting. Always watching. Always becoming. Another story gone, but no sleep yet. Maybe this next one will be the reason you can't close your eyes at all. The air hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from pine needles and damp earth. It clung to my skin, a constant reminder of the forest's embrace, an embrace that felt less like comfort and more like a slow, deliberate suffocation. We, Liam, Maya, Chloe, and I, had sought refuge in this wilderness, a digital detox, a chance to reconnect with nature, and perhaps with each other. Now, 3 days in, I felt more isolated than ever, not just from the world, but from my own sanity. It started subtly, a whisper in the wind that sounded suspiciously like my name. I dismissed it as fatigue, the product of too much campfire smoke and too little sleep. But then came the shadows, fleeting glimpses at the edge of my vision, always gone before I could focus. The forest floor, usually a tapestry of browns and greens, seemed to shift and writhe, the gnarled roots of ancient trees resembling grasping claws. Liam, ever the pragmatist, attributed it all to my overactive imagination. Maya, the group's resident mystic, suggested the forest was simply sensitive to our presence. Chloe, always the quiet observer, offered no explanation, but I caught her watching me, a flicker of unease in her usually placid eyes. Yesterday, while foraging for firewood, I stumbled upon it. A scar on the landscape, hidden deep within a ravine, choked by overgrown vines and decaying foliage. A concrete wall, stained with moss and time, jutted out from the earth, a stark contrast to the surrounding wilderness. Curiosity, that insidious siren, lured me closer. It was an entrance, or what remained of one. A rusted metal door, hanging precariously on its hinges, guarded a gaping maw of darkness. The air emanating from within was cold, stale, and carried a faint, metallic tang that made my stomach churn. I should have turned back. I should have heeded the primal instinct screaming at me to flee, but I didn't. I told the others about my discovery. Liam, predictably, was skeptical. Maya was intrigued, sensing a powerful energy emanating from the site. Chloe remained silent, her unease palpable. We decided to explore it, a decision I now deeply regret. The interior was a labyrinth of corridors, the air thick with the stench of decay, and something else, something indefinable, yet profoundly disturbing. The walls were lined with pipes and wires, remnants of a long-abandoned infrastructure. In some rooms, we found rusted machinery, its purpose now lost to time. In others, there were rows of empty cages, their metal bars twisted and broken. Then, we found the laboratory. It was a large, sterile room, or what was left of one. Stainless steel tables were overturned, scattered with broken glass and shattered equipment. The walls were splattered with a dark, viscous substance that looked suspiciously like dried blood. And then there were the jars. Rows and rows of glass jars, filled with a murky liquid, each containing something unspeakable. Deformed fetuses, grotesque animal hybrids, things that defied classification, things that should not exist. A dog with human hands, a monkey with a bird's head, a pig with the eyes of a man, each a testament to a horrifying experiment, a perversion of nature that had gone horribly wrong. Liam vomited. Maya began to chant, her voice trembling. Chloe simply stared, her face ashen, I felt a cold dread creep into my bones, a certainty that we had stumbled upon something truly evil. We should have left then. We should have sealed the entrance and forgotten we ever saw it. But we didn't. We pressed on, driven by a morbid curiosity, a need to understand the horrors we had witnessed. Deeper within the facility, we found a series of operating rooms, each equipped with restraints and surgical instruments. The walls were covered in diagrams, depicting the grotesque experiments in excruciating detail. We found notebooks filled with handwritten notes, a jumbled mess of scientific jargon and manic scribblings. The author, a Dr. Albright, seemed to have been obsessed with the idea of creating a perfect being, a fusion of human and animal DNA. His notes grew increasingly erratic, filled with paranoia and delusions of grandeur. He wrote of breakthroughs, of successes, but also of failures, of creatures that had gone mad, of experiments that had to be terminated. And then, the final entry. They are watching me. They know what I've done. But I am close. So close to achieving perfection. That's when the lights went out. The darkness was absolute, a suffocating void that pressed in on us from all sides. We fumbled for our flashlights, our hearts pounding in our chests. When the lights flickered back on, they were dim and erratic, casting long, distorted shadows that danced on the walls. We were no longer alone. I saw it first. A fleeting glimpse in the periphery. A hunched figure, lurking in the shadows, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It moved with a strange, jerky gait, its limbs contorted at unnatural angles. Liam screamed. Maya began to pray. Chloe simply froze, her eyes wide with terror. The creature lunged, its claws extended, its mouth open in a silent snarl. It was fast, impossibly fast, moving with a speed that defied human comprehension. Liam tried to fight it off, but he was no match for its raw strength. It tore into him, its claws ripping through his flesh, its teeth sinking into his throat. Maya and Chloe screamed and ran, disappearing into the labyrinthine corridors. I stood frozen, paralyzed by fear, watching as the creature devoured Liam's lifeless body. Then it turned its attention to me, its eyes, burning with an unholy light, locked onto mine. It took a step closer, and I could see it clearly. It was a grotesque amalgamation of human and animal parts, a twisted mockery of nature. Its body was covered in patches of fur and scales. Its limbs were a mismatched collection of human and animal appendages, and its face was a horrifying mask of human and animal features. It was Dr. Albright's perfect being, his ultimate creation. And it was hungry. I ran, blindly, desperately, through the corridors, the creature hot on my heels. I could hear its heavy breathing, its claws scraping against the concrete floor. I stumbled and fell, scraping my knees and elbows. I scrambled to my feet and kept running, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I found a room, a small, windowless cell, and slammed the door shut, locking it from the inside. I pressed my back against the door, my heart pounding in my chest, listening for the creature's approach. It came quickly, its heavy footsteps echoing in the corridor. It slammed against the door, rattling the hinges. I braced myself, praying that the door would hold. It slammed against the door again, harder this time. The hinges groaned, the wood splintered. I knew it wouldn't hold for long. I looked around the cell, desperately searching for a weapon, for anything that could help me defend myself. There was nothing. The cell was bare, empty, a prison. The creature slammed against the door one last time, and it burst open, sending splinters of wood flying. It stood in the doorway, its eyes burning with an unholy light, its mouth open in a silent snarl. I screamed. I don't know how long I screamed. It felt like an eternity. The creature lunged, and I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the pain. But it never came. I opened my eyes, and the creature was gone. The cell was empty, silent. I was alone. I stumbled out of the cell, my body trembling, my mind reeling. I made my way back through the corridors, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. I found Maya and Chloe huddled together in a corner, their faces pale, their eyes wide with terror. They told me what they had seen. Other creatures, similar to the one that had attacked Liam, lurking in the shadows, watching them, hunting them. They had barely escaped with their lives. We knew we had to get out of there. We had to escape this nightmare. We made our way back to the entrance, our hearts pounding in our chests, our senses on high alert. We didn't see any more creatures, but we could feel them, watching us, waiting for us to make a mistake. We reached the entrance, the rusted metal door hanging precariously on its hinges. We pushed it open and stumbled out into the forest, gasping for fresh air. We ran, without stopping, without looking back, until we reached our campsite. We packed our gear, our hands trembling, our eyes darting nervously into the shadows. We didn't say a word. We just ran. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the forest, until we could see the lights of civilization in the distance. We collapsed on the side of the road, exhausted, terrified, and forever changed. We never spoke of what happened in the forest. We tried to forget it, to bury it deep within our memories. But it was always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to resurface. I tried to go back to my old life, to pretend that nothing had happened. But it was impossible. I was haunted by the images of the grotesque creatures, by the screams of Liam, by the knowledge that something truly evil existed in the world. I started having nightmares. I would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming, covered in sweat, convinced that the creatures were in my room, watching me. I became paranoid, suspicious of everyone. I saw the creatures in the faces of strangers, in the shadows of buildings, in the reflections of windows. I started to lose my mind. I knew I couldn't go on like this. I had to do something. I had to stop the creatures, to prevent them from escaping the forest and spreading their evil to the world. I decided to go back. I knew it was a suicide mission. I knew I would probably die. But I couldn't live with the knowledge that the creatures were still out there, that they were still a threat. I packed my gear, loaded my gun, and drove back to the forest. It was even more oppressive than I remembered. The air was thick and heavy. The shadows were deeper. The silence was more profound. I made my way back to the abandoned research facility, my heart pounding in my chest, my senses on high alert. The entrance was still there, the rusted metal door hanging precariously on its hinges. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The darkness was absolute, the silence deafening. I turned on my flashlight and began to explore the corridors, my gun raised, my finger on the trigger. The facility was even more dilapidated than I remembered. The walls were crumbling. The floors were covered in debris. The air was thick with the stench of decay. I found the laboratory. It was just as I remembered it, a scene of carnage and horror. The stainless steel tables were overturned. The glass jars were shattered. The walls were splattered with blood. But something was different. The creatures were gone. The jars were empty. The cages were open. The corridors were silent. They had escaped. I felt a cold dread creep into my bones. They were out there, somewhere, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. I continued to explore the facility, searching for any sign of the creatures, any clue as to where they had gone. I found Dr. Albright's office. It was a small, cluttered room, filled with books, papers, and scientific equipment. I searched through the papers, hoping to find something that could help me track down the creatures. I found a notebook hidden beneath a pile of papers. It was Dr. Albright's journal, his personal account of his experiments. I began to read, my heart pounding in my chest. His entries grew increasingly erratic, filled with paranoia and delusions of grandeur. He wrote of breakthroughs, of successes, but also of failures, of creatures that had gone mad, of experiments that had to be terminated. And then, the final entry. They are watching me. They know what I've done. But I am close. So close to achieving perfection. I have found the key. The final ingredient. It is within me. I didn't understand. What did he mean? What was the final ingredient? I turned the page, and there it was. A diagram. A detailed illustration of the human brain. And in the center of the brain, a small, glowing orb. The pineal gland. Dr. Albright believed that the pineal gland, the so-called third eye, was the key to unlocking the full potential of the human mind. He believed that by manipulating the pineal gland, he could create a being with superhuman abilities, a being that was both human and animal, both rational and instinctual. He had injected himself with the creature's DNA. He had become one of them. That's when I heard it. A sound, a faint scratching noise, coming from behind me. I turned around, my gun raised, my finger on the trigger. And there it was, standing in the doorway, its eyes burning with an unholy light, its mouth open in a silent snarl. It was Dr. Albright, but he was no longer human. He was a grotesque amalgamation of human and animal parts, a twisted mockery of nature. He was the perfect being. He lunged, and I fired my gun. The bullets ripped through his flesh, but they didn't stop him. He kept coming, his claws extended, his mouth open in a silent snarl. I fired again and again until my gun was empty. He was still coming. I dropped my gun and ran, blindly, desperately, through the corridors. He was hot on my heels, his heavy breathing echoing in the darkness. I stumbled and fell, scraping my knees and elbows. I scrambled to my feet and kept running, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I found a room, a small, windowless cell, and slammed the door shut, locking it from the inside. I pressed my back against the door, my heart pounding in my chest, listening for his approach. He came quickly, his heavy footsteps echoing in the corridor. He slammed against the door, rattling the hinges. I braced myself, praying that the door would hold. He slammed against the door again, harder this time. The hinges groaned, the wood splintered. I knew it wouldn't hold for long. I looked around the cell, desperately searching for a weapon, for anything that could help me defend myself. There was nothing. The cell was bare, empty, a prison. He slammed against the door one last time, and it burst open, sending splinters of wood flying. He stood in the doorway, his eyes burning with an unholy light, his mouth open in a silent snarl. I screamed. He lunged, and I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the pain. But it never came. I opened my eyes, and he was gone. The cell was empty, silent. I was alone, or so I thought. A low growl rumbled from the corner of the room. I slowly turned, my blood turning to ice. There, crouched in the shadows, were the others. The creatures. They hadn't escaped. They had been waiting for me. Their eyes glowed with the same unholy light as Dr. Albright's. They were hungry, and I was trapped. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was their teeth, sharp and glistening, closing in. The forest had claimed me, body and soul, and now I was part of it. A silent guardian of its secrets, forever bound to the horrors within. The detox had worked in a way. I was one with nature now, just not in the way I had intended. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that someone else would stumble upon this place. Someone else would be lured in by the siren song of curiosity. And the cycle would begin again. The forest always gets what it wants, and it always waits. If that one didn't help you sleep, the next story won't either. Stay with me. It only gets darker from here. The insomnia started subtly, a thief in the night stealing hours one by one. Now, it was a ravenous beast, devouring entire days. I hadn't slept properly in weeks, maybe months. Time had become a blurry, distorted landscape, the edges frayed and indistinct. I existed in a perpetual twilight, a waking nightmare fueled by lukewarm coffee and the gnawing dread that something was profoundly wrong. The cabin was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place to escape the city's relentless hum, to find solace in the silence of the woods. My grandfather's legacy, a weathered structure nestled deep within the Adirondacks, far from prying eyes and judging whispers. But the silence here was different, not peaceful, but expectant, as if the very trees were holding their breath, waiting. It began with the notes, scraps of paper, tucked away in drawers, under floorboards, scrawled with a handwriting that was undeniably mine, yet utterly alien. Phrases like, "He hungers," "The veil thins," and the most unsettling of all, "I am not myself." I dismissed them initially as sleep-deprived ramblings, the product of a mind teetering on the brink. But the frequency increased, the messages growing more sinister, more knowing. Then came the reflections. I'd catch glimpses in the dusty mirror above the wash basin, a flicker of something not me, a tightening of the jaw, a coldness in the eyes, a subtle shift in the set of my mouth that hinted at cruelty. I'd blink, and it would be gone, replaced by my own haggard, sleep-deprived face. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was taking root, twisting its tendrils around my sanity. The cabin itself seemed to be conspiring against me. The floorboards groaned underfoot, even when I stood perfectly still. The wind howled through the eaves, not with the mournful cry of nature, but with a malevolent whisper that seemed to call my name. Shadows danced in the periphery, fleeting shapes that resolved into nothing when I turned to face them. I tried to rationalize it. The isolation, the lack of sleep, the weight of my grandfather's passing was all conspiring to break me. But the rational explanations felt hollow, inadequate, in the face of the growing unease that clung to me like a shroud. One afternoon, I found a new note. It was tucked inside my grandfather's old journal, a leather-bound volume filled with his meticulous observations of the natural world. This note was different. It wasn't a cryptic phrase, but a single, chilling sentence. "He knows you're awake." The blood drained from my face. How could it know? How could it know I was awake, when I felt like I hadn't truly slept in an eternity? The paranoia intensified, a suffocating blanket that smothered every rational thought. I started barricading the windows at night, piling furniture against the door, as if flimsy wood and worn fabric could protect me from whatever was lurking in the darkness. Sleep became an enemy, a gateway to something I didn't understand, something I feared. I stayed awake for days, fueled by caffeine and adrenaline, my eyes darting nervously at every shadow, every creak, every whisper of the wind. The line between reality and hallucination blurred, the cabin transforming into a labyrinth of fear. I started talking to myself, arguing with the voices in my head, trying to convince myself that I was still in control. But the voices grew louder, more insistent, their whispers coalescing into a single, malevolent presence that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the cabin. One night, I found myself standing in front of the mirror again. The reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't me. The eyes were cold, devoid of humanity, filled with a predatory hunger. A slow, cruel smile spread across the lips, revealing teeth that seemed sharper, more pointed than my own. "Hello, Daniel," the reflection said, its voice a distorted echo of my own. "It's been a long time." I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who are you? What do you want?" The reflection chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. "I am you, Daniel. Or rather, I am what you were always meant to be." "No," I gasped, shaking my head. "That's not true. I'm not like you." "Aren't you?" The reflection sneered. "Look at yourself, Daniel. You're weak, pathetic. You've wasted your life on meaningless pursuits, on fleeting pleasures. I offer you power, purpose. I offer you release." "Release from what?" "From the burden of being you," the reflection said, its eyes burning into mine. "From the pain, the disappointment, the endless cycle of failure. Let me take over, Daniel. Let me show you what you're truly capable of." I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed, trapped in the gaze of my own monstrous reflection. The room seemed to shrink around me, the walls closing in, the air growing thick and suffocating. "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I won't let you." The reflection's smile widened, revealing more of those unnaturally sharp teeth. "You have no choice, Daniel. I am already inside you. I am your thoughts, your desires, your darkest impulses. I am the monster you've always tried to hide." It lunged at me, its hand reaching out from the mirror, grasping my throat. I screamed, a primal sound of terror, and slammed my fist into the glass. The mirror shattered, sending shards of glass flying across the room. I stumbled back, clutching my throat, gasping for air. The reflection was gone, but the feeling of its presence lingered. A cold, malevolent energy that permeated the cabin. I spent the next few days in a state of near catatonia, huddled in a corner, rocking back and forth, muttering to myself. I tried to convince myself that it was all a dream, a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation and stress. But deep down, I knew the truth. The reflection was real. It was inside me, waiting, biding its time. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, fleeting glimpses of movement, shadows that seemed to watch me. I heard whispers in the wind, voices that called my name, promising power, promising release. One evening, I found myself drawn to the woods. The moon was full, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I walked deeper and deeper into the woods, drawn by an irresistible force. I didn't know where I was going, but I felt like I was being led, guided by something unseen. I came to a clearing, a small, circular space, surrounded by ancient trees. In the center of the clearing was a stone altar, covered in moss and lichen. I didn't know how I knew, but I knew that this was a place of power, a place where something ancient and terrible had once been worshipped. As I stood there, bathed in the moonlight, I felt a change come over me. The voices in my head grew louder, more insistent. The feeling of being watched intensified, as if the very trees were alive, their eyes fixed upon me. I looked down at my hands, and I saw that they were changing. The skin was becoming pale and translucent, the veins beneath the surface turning black. My fingernails were growing longer, sharper, transforming into claws. I looked up at the moon, and I felt a surge of power coursing through my veins. I felt alive, more alive than I had ever felt before. "Yes," I whispered, my voice no longer my own. "Yes, I understand now." I raised my hands to the sky, and I began to chant, words that I didn't know I knew, words that resonated with an ancient, unholy power. The trees around me swayed and groaned. The wind howled through the branches, and the ground beneath my feet began to tremble. As I chanted, I felt the entity inside me taking control. My thoughts, my memories, my very being were being subsumed by its will. I was no longer Daniel. I was something else, something darker, something infinitely more powerful. The ritual continued for what seemed like an eternity. The moon climbed higher in the sky, bathing the clearing in its ethereal light. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied, until it reached a fever pitch. Then, silence. The entity had taken complete control. Daniel was gone, replaced by the malevolent force that had been lurking within him all along. It looked around the clearing, its eyes gleaming with triumph. It stretched out its hands, feeling the power coursing through its veins. "Finally," it said, its voice a chilling blend of Daniel's and something else entirely. "I am free." It turned and walked back into the woods, leaving the clearing behind. It had plans, terrible plans. It would use Daniel's body to wreak havoc, to spread chaos and destruction. It would feed on the fear and suffering of others, growing stronger with each passing moment. The cabin stood silent and empty, a testament to the fragility of the mind and the darkness that lurks within us all. The woods held their breath, waiting for the return of the monster that had been unleashed. But the story doesn't end there. It never does. Because the entity, in its arrogance, made a mistake. It underestimated Daniel's will, his capacity for resistance. Deep within the recesses of his mind, a spark of Daniel's consciousness remained. It was faint, flickering, but it was there, and it was fighting back. Daniel was trapped, a prisoner in his own body, forced to watch as the entity committed unspeakable acts. But he refused to give up. He clung to the memories of his past, to the love he had known, to the hope that one day he might be free. He began to exert his influence, subtly at first, then more forcefully. He would try to steer the entity's actions, to prevent it from causing harm. He would whisper words of doubt, of regret, trying to weaken its hold. The entity sensed Daniel's resistance, and it grew furious. It tried to crush his spirit, to extinguish the last vestiges of his humanity. But Daniel refused to be broken. The battle raged within him, a silent war for control of his mind and body. The entity was powerful, but Daniel was determined. He would not let it win. One day, as the entity was preparing to commit another act of violence, Daniel seized an opportunity. He focused all his will, all his energy, and he forced the entity to hesitate. For a brief moment, the entity lost control, and in that moment, Daniel acted. He grabbed a knife, a hunting knife that had belonged to his grandfather, and he plunged it into his own chest. The entity screamed, a sound of pure rage and frustration. It tried to stop him, but it was too late. The knife had pierced his heart. As Daniel lay dying, he felt the entity weakening, its power fading. He knew that he was sacrificing himself, but he also knew that he was saving others. With his last breath, he whispered a single word: goodbye. The entity vanished, its essence dissipating into the ether. Daniel's body went limp, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The cabin was silent once more. The woods held their breath, waiting. But this time, there was no monster, only the memory of a man who had fought for his soul, and who had ultimately triumphed, even in death. Or so it seems. The thing about entities, about darkness, is that it never truly disappears. It merely lies dormant, waiting for an opportunity to return. And in the shadows of the cabin, in the whispers of the wind, a faint echo of the entity's presence remained. A seed of evil, planted deep within the earth, waiting to sprout, waiting to corrupt. Years passed. The cabin remained abandoned, a forgotten relic of a tragic past. But the woods remembered. They remembered the chanting, the ritual, the sacrifice. And one day, a new visitor arrived. A young man, drawn to the cabin by a sense of curiosity, a desire to escape the city, to find solace in the silence of the woods. He didn't know about Daniel, about the entity, about the darkness that lurked within the cabin. He only knew that he felt drawn to this place, if something was calling him. He opened the door, stepped inside, and the woods held their breath. The cycle begins anew. The notes reappear, the reflections distort, the whispers intensify. He finds his grandfather's journal, the chilling sentence staring back at him. He knows you're awake. He is not alone. He will never be alone. The entity is waiting, patient, hungry. It has found a new vessel, a new opportunity to unleash its darkness upon the world. And as the young man stares into the dusty mirror, he sees a flicker of something not him. A tightening of the jaw, a coldness in the eyes, a subtle shift in the set of his mouth that hints at cruelty. The reflection smiles. The woods whisper. He is awake. Your eyes are still open, and so is the night. Let's move to the next story. It's not any softer than the last. The dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight, slicing through the gloom of the antique store, illuminating the chipped porcelain dolls and tarnished silverware like relics from a forgotten civilization. Sarah had been drawn to it immediately. A hulking Victorian mirror propped against the back wall, its ornate frame carved with grotesque cherubs and thorny vines. It was undeniably beautiful, undeniably unsettling. It's striking, I'd said, trying to mask the unease that prickled my skin. Strikingly perfect for the hallway, Sarah had countered, her eyes already alight with decorating possibilities. Imagine it reflecting the light from the chandelier. I hadn't imagined it reflecting light. I'd imagined it reflecting something else entirely. Something wrong. But Sarah was already negotiating the price with the proprietor, a wizened man with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of secrets. He'd given us a knowing smile, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and a price that was suspiciously low. We hauled the mirror back to the cabin, our escape, as Sarah called it. A dilapidated A-frame nestled deep in the Adirondack wilderness, miles from the nearest town, miles from anything resembling civilization. It was Sarah's dream, a place to disconnect, to reconnect with nature, to find inspiration. For me, it was just isolated. The first few days were idyllic, or as idyllic as they could be in a cabin that smelled perpetually of damp wood and pine needles. We hiked, we read, we made love. The mirror, now hanging in the hallway, seemed to blend into the background. Another antique acquisition in a house full of them. Then, the fleeting glimpses started. It was always in my peripheral vision, a flicker in the corner of my eye, a distorted reflection, a shadow that wasn't mine, a face that wasn't Sarah's. I'd dismiss it as fatigue, as tricks of the light, as the overactive imagination of a writer prone to dark thoughts. But the glimpses became more frequent, more defined. One morning, while brushing my teeth, I saw it clearly. A gaunt face, pale and decaying, pressed against the glass, its eyes wide with a silent scream. I recoiled, splashing toothpaste down my shirt, and when I looked again, it was gone. Just my own startled reflection staring back. "Sarah," I said, my voice trembling. "I think there's something wrong with the mirror." She laughed, a light, dismissive sound. "Don't be silly, darling. It's just an old mirror. You're probably just tired." Tired. That's what she always said. Tired, stressed, overworked, as if my anxieties were nothing more than the product of a weary mind. But I wasn't tired. I was terrified. The reflections grew bolder, more menacing. I started avoiding the hallway, taking circuitous routes through the cabin to avoid catching a glimpse of the thing trapped within the glass. But it was no use. It was always there, waiting, lurking in the periphery. Its presence, a constant, suffocating weight. One evening, while Sarah was out hiking, I decided to confront it. I stood before the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands clammy with sweat. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The reflection shimmered, the glass rippling like water. The gaunt face appeared, closer now, its features more defined. I could see the individual strands of greasy hair plastered to its forehead, the yellowed teeth bared in a silent snarl, the vacant, pleading eyes. And then, it spoke. Not with sound, but with a feeling, a cold, invasive presence that wormed its way into my mind. "Help me." The voice, if it could be called that, was a whisper of despair, a plea for release. It resonated deep within me, stirring something dark and primal. I stumbled back, clutching my head, trying to block out the voice, the image, the sheer horror of it all. Sarah returned later that evening, her face flushed with exertion, her eyes sparkling with the joy of the outdoors. I tried to tell her what had happened, but the words caught in my throat. How could I explain something so unexplainable? "You look pale," she said, her brow furrowing with concern. "Are you feeling all right?" I just need some rest," I mumbled, avoiding her gaze. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the wind howling through the trees, the creaking of the cabin, the incessant whispers in my mind. "Help me! Help me! Help me!" I got up, drawn to the hallway like a moth to a flame. The mirror stood there, silent and still, its surface reflecting the pale moonlight. But the reflection wasn't mine. It was the gaunt face, its eyes burning with an unholy light. It raised a hand, its fingers long and skeletal, and pressed it against the glass. I felt a corresponding pressure on my own hand, as if it were reaching out to me, begging me to touch it. I hesitated, my mind screaming at me to run, to flee, to get as far away from this place as possible. But something held me back, a morbid curiosity, a perverse desire to understand. Slowly, tentatively, I reached out my hand and touched the glass. The moment my fingers made contact, a jolt of energy surged through me, a searing pain that ripped through my body. I cried out, collapsing to the floor, my vision blurring. The mirror shattered, not into neat, predictable shards, but into a million jagged fragments that exploded outwards, filling the hallway with a glittering, deadly rain. And then, silence. I lay there, gasping for breath, my body trembling, my mind reeling. The hallway was a mess, the floor covered in shards of glass, the air thick with the smell of ozone. And standing in the center of it all, where the mirror had once been, was the figure from the glass. It was even more horrifying in person. Its skin was stretched taut over its bones. Its eyes were hollow pits of darkness. Its mouth was a gaping maw, filled with blackened teeth. It was a walking corpse, a creature of nightmare, a thing that should not exist. It took a step towards me, its skeletal fingers reaching out, its eyes fixed on mine. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but my limbs were frozen with terror. It was going to kill me. I knew it. This was the end. But then, something unexpected happened. The figure stopped. It tilted its head, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. And then, it spoke. Its voice was raspy, guttural, barely audible, but I understood the words. "Thank you," it croaked. "You have freed me." And then it turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the cabin. I lay there for what seemed like an eternity, paralyzed with fear, waiting for it to return. But it didn't. Finally, I managed to pull myself to my feet, my body aching, my mind numb. I stumbled through the cabin, searching for Sarah, desperate for some kind of explanation, some kind of reassurance. But she wasn't there. The cabin was empty. And then I saw it. A note, lying on the kitchen table, written in Sarah's familiar handwriting. "I've gone for a walk. I'll be back later." But something was wrong. The handwriting was different, shaky, uneven, and the words, they felt off. I picked up the note, my heart pounding in my chest. And then, I noticed something else. A faint, lingering scent in the air. The scent of decay. I ran outside, screaming Sarah's name, my voice cracking with desperation. But there was no answer. Only the wind whispering through the trees, the rustling of leaves, the oppressive silence of the wilderness. I searched for hours, calling her name until my voice was hoarse, my body exhausted. But it was no use. She was gone. And then, I saw it. A trail of footprints, leading away from the cabin, into the depths of the forest. Footprints that weren't Sarah's. They were too large, too deep, too inhuman. I followed the footprints, my heart filled with a dread I had never known before. They led me deeper and deeper into the woods, past gnarled trees and tangled undergrowth, past dark ravines and hidden streams. And then, I came to a clearing. And in the center of the clearing, I saw it. Sarah. But it wasn't Sarah. It was the figure from the mirror. It was wearing Sarah's clothes, her hair, her face. But it wasn't her. Its eyes were hollow pits of darkness. Its mouth was a gaping maw, filled with blackened teeth. Its skin was stretched taut over its bones. It was a grotesque parody of the woman I loved. It turned to me, its eyes fixed on mine. And then, it smiled. "Hello, darling," it said, its voice a raspy, guttural imitation of Sarah's. I've been waiting for you. I screamed, a primal, animalistic sound that echoed through the forest. I turned and ran, fleeing back towards the cabin, back towards the only place I knew. But it was no use. It was faster than me. It caught me. It grabbed me from behind, its skeletal fingers digging into my flesh. I struggled. I fought. I screamed. But it was too strong. It dragged me back to the clearing, back to the grotesque parody of Sarah. And then, it forced me to look. It forced me to see what it had done. It had transformed Sarah into a mirror image of itself. A decaying, skeletal creature, trapped in a grotesque mockery of life. And then, it spoke. "Now," it said, its voice dripping with malice. "We can be together. Forever." It raised its hand, its skeletal fingers reaching out to touch me. And then, I understood. The mirror hadn't just trapped the figure. It had trapped something else as well. A curse. A curse that transformed anyone who looked into the mirror for too long into a reflection of the trapped entity. A curse that had now claimed Sarah, and a curse that was about to claim me. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. But then, nothing happened. I opened my eyes, confused. The figure was gone. The grotesque parody of Sarah was gone. The clearing was empty. I was alone. I stumbled back to the cabin, my mind reeling, my body trembling. I collapsed onto the bed, exhausted, terrified, and utterly alone. I don't know how long I lay there. Hours? Days? It all blurred together. Eventually, I managed to pull myself together. I packed my bags, gathered my belongings, and prepared to leave. I couldn't stay here. Not anymore. This place was cursed. As I was leaving, I glanced back at the hallway. The mirror was gone, of course, but the space where it had hung was still there. A dark, empty rectangle on the wall. And then, I saw it. A faint reflection, shimmering in the air. A distorted image. A shadow that wasn't mine. A face that wasn't mine. It was my own face, but it was different. It was gaunt, pale, decaying. Its eyes were hollow pits of darkness. Its mouth was a gaping maw filled with blackened teeth. It was a reflection of the figure from the mirror. And then, it smiled. I screamed, a primal animalistic sound that echoed through the cabin. I turned and ran, fleeing from the cabin, fleeing from the wilderness, fleeing from the reflection. I ran as fast as I could, as far as I could, until I collapsed from exhaustion. I don't know where I am now. I don't know how long I've been running. All I know is that I can't stop. Because every time I look in a mirror, every time I see my reflection, I see it. The gaunt face, the hollow eyes, the blackened teeth, the reflection of the curse. And I know that it's only a matter of time before it consumes me completely. Before I become the thing I fear the most. Before I become the reflection. I can feel it happening already. My skin is growing paler. My eyes are growing darker. My teeth are starting to decay. I can hear the whispers in my mind, the pleas for release, the echoes of despair. Help me. Help me. Help me. But there's no one to help me. I'm alone, and I'm terrified. I'm writing this now, as a warning. If you ever come across an old mirror, a Victorian mirror, with grotesque cherubs and thorny vines, do not buy it. Do not look into it. Do not let it into your home. Because if you do, you will be cursed. You will be trapped. You will become the reflection. and you will never escape. I can feel it taking over now. The darkness is closing in. The whispers are growing louder. I can see it in the mirror. My reflection. It's not me anymore. It's the curse. And it's smiling. Goodbye. You're still here? Then you're ready. The next story is waiting in the dark. Let's begin. The dust motes danced in the single shaft of moonlight, slicing through the grimy window, each particle a tiny, frantic spark in the oppressive darkness. The air in the Blackwood Sanatorium hung thick and heavy, a cloying miasma of disinfectant and decay, a scent that clung to the back of my throat like a shroud. I hadn't intended to come here. Not really. Curiosity, that insidious siren, had lured me in, whispering promises of answers to the disappearances plaguing Havenwood. Answers that the sheriff, bless his simple heart, couldn't even begin to fathom. Havenwood, a town choked by fear, its residents huddled behind locked doors, their eyes darting nervously at every shadow. 3 gone now. 3 souls swallowed whole during the waxing gibbous moon. Old Maggie, the baker, vanished from her shop, the oven still warm, a half-kneaded loaf abandoned on the counter. Then young Timmy, the paper boy, his bicycle lying abandoned on Elm Street, papers scattered like fallen leaves. And just last week, Sarah, the librarian, gone from her desk, a book on lunar cycles open beside her empty chair. The sheriff called it coincidence, bad luck. But old Silas, Havenwood's resident conspiracy theorist, a man dismissed as a harmless lunatic, saw a pattern. He spoke of a creature from the old folklore, a shapeshifter, a lunar predator that stalked its prey under the specific light of the waxing gibbous. He called it the glimmering maw. I, of course, didn't believe him. Not really. But the fear in Havenwood was palpable, infectious. And the Blackwood Sanatorium, abandoned for 50 years, stood just outside town, a silent sentinel, its history intertwined with Havenwood's darkest secrets. Silas claimed the glimmering maw had been drawn to the sanatorium in the past, feeding on the despair and madness that festered within its walls. So here I was, flashlight beam trembling in my hand, the silence of the sanatorium pressing down on me like a physical weight. The main entrance was boarded up, but a section of the back fence had rusted through, offering a clandestine entry. I told myself I was just exploring, looking for clues, anything to ease the growing panic in Havenwood. But deep down, a primal fear gnawed at me. A fear that Silas, in his rambling madness, might be right. The flashlight beam danced across peeling wallpaper, revealing faded floral patterns and grotesque stains that looked disturbingly like blood. The air was cold, bone-chillingly cold, despite the summer heat outside. Each step echoed through the empty corridors, amplified by the silence, making me feel like I was the only person left in the world. I found myself in what must have been the main ward. Rows of rusted bed frames lined the walls, their mattresses long gone, leaving only the skeletal remains of springs and metal. A single, tattered curtain hung limply from a broken rod, swaying slightly as if stirred by a phantom breeze. A whisper. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. The flashlight beam wavered, casting grotesque shadows that danced on the walls. I strained my ears, listening for any sound, any indication that I wasn't alone. Nothing. Just the silence. Heavier now. More oppressive. I told myself it was just the wind, playing tricks on my ears. The sanatorium was old, riddled with cracks and crevices. The wind could easily find its way in. but the feeling of being watched persisted, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as if eyes were boring into me from the darkness. I spun around, flashlight beam sweeping across the room, but found nothing. I moved on, deeper into the sanatorium, drawn by an unseen force, a morbid curiosity that I couldn't resist. I passed through a dilapidated dining hall, the tables overturned, the floor littered with broken plates and silverware. Then a recreation room, its walls adorned with faded murals of idyllic landscapes, a cruel contrast to the reality of the sanatorium. In the recreation room, I found a child's drawing, pinned to the wall with a rusty nail. It was a crude depiction of a figure with long, spindly limbs and glowing red eyes. Above the figure, a crescent moon hung in the sky. A chill ran down my spine. It was just a drawing, I told myself. A child's imagination. But the image was unsettling, disturbing. It resonated with the fear that was gripping Havenwood, the fear of the glimmering maw. As I continued my exploration, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, swirling around me like a vortex of sound. I couldn't make out any words, just fragments of voices, murmuring, moaning, crying. The shadows deepened, stretching and contorting into grotesque shapes. I could have sworn I saw movement in the periphery of my vision, fleeting glimpses of figures lurking in the darkness. But whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. My sense of reality began to unravel. The sanatorium seemed to be alive, breathing, its walls closing in on me, suffocating me with its oppressive presence. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, a waking dream from which there was no escape. I found myself in the basement, a labyrinth of narrow corridors and damp stone walls. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay, a smell that seemed to seep into my skin, clinging to me like a second layer of clothing. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices that echoed through the corridors, driving me to the brink of madness. I stumbled blindly through the darkness, my flashlight beam dancing erratically, revealing glimpses of rusted pipes, broken machinery, and strange, unidentifiable objects. Then I saw it. A door at the end of a long, dark corridor. It was made of heavy oak, reinforced with iron bands, and sealed with a thick padlock. It looked out of place, incongruous with the rest of the sanatorium. I approached the door cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers seemed to intensify as I drew closer, as if the door was a source of some dark, malevolent, enderdevilent energy. I reached out and touched the door, my fingers tracing the cold, rough surface of the wood. A jolt of electricity shot through me, a shock that left me trembling. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that something terrible lay behind that door. Something that was connected to the disappearances in Havenwood. Something that was connected to the glimmering maw. I fumbled in my pocket for my lockpicks, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely hold them. It took me several minutes, but finally, with a click, the padlock sprang open. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Fear, raw and primal, threatened to overwhelm me. I knew that opening this door would change everything. There was no turning back, but curiosity, that insidious siren, was too strong to resist. I took a deep breath, steeled my nerves, and turned the doorknob. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the depths of the earth. The air that wafted up from the staircase was cold and stale, carrying with it the scent of decay and something else, Something indefinable. Something that made my stomach churn. I shone my flashlight down the staircase, but the beam only penetrated a few feet into the darkness. I could see nothing. Only the vague outline of the steps leading down into the abyss. I started down the staircase, my feet moving. Slowly, cautiously. The steps were damp and slippery, covered in a layer of moss and grime. The air grew colder with each step, the whispers louder, more insistent. As I descended, I began to feel a strange sensation, a tingling in my skin, as if I was being bombarded by some kind of energy. My head started to ache, my vision blurred, and I felt a growing sense of disorientation. I reached the bottom of the staircase and found myself in a small, circular chamber. The walls were made of rough-hewn stone, and the floor was covered in a layer of dirt and dust. A single torch flickered in a sconce on the wall, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist like living things. In the center of the chamber, there was a stone altar. On the altar, there was a book. I approached the altar cautiously, my flashlight beam fixed on the book. It was bound in leather, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. The cover was blank, devoid of any title or inscription. I reached out and picked up the book, my fingers trembling. The leather felt cold and clammy to the touch, as if it had been soaked in blood. I opened the book and began to read. The words were written in a language I didn't recognize, a language that seemed to resonate deep within my soul. As I read, I felt a strange connection to the words, as if they were speaking directly to me, revealing secrets that had been hidden for centuries. The book told the story of the Glimmering Maw, a creature of ancient power, a shapeshifter that fed on fear and despair. It described the creature's origins, its rituals, and its connection to the lunar cycles. The book also revealed the creature's weakness, a specific incantation, recited under the light of the waning crescent moon, could banish the Glimmering Maw back to the realm from whence it came. As I read the incantation, I felt a surge of power coursing through my veins. I knew that I had to recite the incantation, that I had to banish the Glimmering Maw and save Havenwood from its terror. But as I finished reading the incantation, I realized something terrible. The book was not just a record of the Glimmering Maw. It was a guide to becoming the Glimmering Maw. The tingling in my skin intensified. The ache in my head grew sharper, and I felt a strange transformation taking place within me. My bones were shifting, my muscles were contorting, and my skin was crawling. I looked down at my hands and saw that they were changing, growing longer, more spindly. My fingernails transforming into sharp, curved claws. My eyes burned with a fiery red light, and a guttural growl escaped my throat. I was becoming the Glimmering Maw. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a vortex of madness. They were no longer just voices. They were thoughts, desires, urges. The urge to hunt, to kill, to feed. I stumbled out of the chamber, my body writhing and contorting, my mind consumed by a primal hunger. I could smell the fear in Havenwood, the fear that was drawing me towards it like a moth to a flame. I emerged from the sanatorium, my body now fully transformed into the Glimmering Maw. And it stood on the edge of Trois, the woods, my red eyes scanning the town below. Havenwood was dark and silent, its residents huddled behind locked doors, their hearts pounding with fear. The waxing gibbous moon hung high in the sky, bathing the town in its eerie light. I let out a deafening roar, a sound that echoed through the hills, shattering the silence and sending shivers down the spines of everyone in Havenwood. Then I descended upon the town, a creature of nightmare, a predator of the night. The next morning, the sheriff found the sanatorium empty, the book gone, and a single, tattered page lying on the floor of the chamber. It contained the incantation to banish the glimmering maw. But it was too late. Havenwood was forever changed. The fear remained, a lingering shadow that clung to the town like a shroud. And every time the waxing gibbous moon rose in the sky, the residents of Havenwood would lock their doors, close their curtains, and pray that the glimmering maw would not return. They never found me. Not really. They found traces, whispers, shadows in the corners of their eyes. They saw the fear in each other, a reflection of the monster that now lived within them all. I am the glimmering maw. I am the fear. I am the darkness that lurks in the hearts of men. And I will always be watching. The old woman, Martha, found me first. She was wandering the woods, muttering about lost cats and forgotten recipes, her mind a tangled web of memories and delusions. She saw me, crouched in the shadows, my form still shifting, still adapting to its new reality. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just smiled, a vacant, knowing smile, and offered me a piece of stale bread. I didn't take it, but I didn't kill her either. Something in her vacant gaze, something in her utter lack of fear, stayed my hand. She was already lost, already consumed by her own internal darkness. She was no prey for the glimmering maw. Then came the children. Drawn to the woods by whispers and rumors, by the thrill of the forbidden. They saw me, a fleeting glimpse of something monstrous in the trees, and they ran, their laughter turning to screams. I pursued them, not with the intent to kill, but to instill fear, to feed on their terror. Their screams were music to my ears, a symphony of dread that fueled my transformation, solidifying my existence. The sheriff, bless his simple heart, tried to hunt me. He organized search parties, armed with rifles and flashlights, but they found nothing. I was always one step ahead, a shadow in the trees, a whisper in the wind. I toyed with them, leaving false trails, leading them into dead ends, driving them to the brink of exhaustion and despair. He started to doubt himself, the sheriff. He started to see shadows where there were none, to hear whispers in the silence. He started to fear the darkness, the woods, the moon. He started to become like me. The town turned on itself. Accusations flew. Suspicions festered. Neighbors turned against neighbors. Friends became enemies. The fear was a virus, spreading through Havenwood, consuming everything in its path. And I thrived. The waxing gibbous returned, and with it, a renewed hunger. This time, I was bolder, more brazen. I stalked the streets of Havenwood, a shadow in the moonlight, a nightmare made flesh. I took a young couple, parked on Lover's Lane, their laughter turning to screams as I descended upon them. I took a lone farmer, tending his fields late at night, his cries for help swallowed by the darkness. I took a stray dog, its whimpers echoing through the empty streets. Each kill fueled my power, solidifying my form, making me stronger, more terrifying. I was no longer just a creature of folklore, a figment of Silas's imagination. I was real. I was here, and I was never going to leave. The town was dying, slowly but surely. Businesses closed, houses were abandoned, and people fled, seeking refuge in other towns, other states. But they could never escape the fear, the knowledge that the glimmering maw was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for them. I watched them go, their faces etched with despair, their eyes haunted by the memory of Havenwood. And I smiled, a cruel, predatory smile, knowing that I had won. I am the Glimmering Maw. I am the master of Havenwood, and I will reign here forever. But even in my triumph, a seed of doubt began to sprout, a flicker of memory, a whisper of my former self, a longing for the life I had lost. I remembered the book, the incantation, the hope that I had once held. I remembered the desire to save Havenwood, to banish the Glimmering Maw, and I realized that I had failed. I had become the very thing I had sought to destroy. The guilt was overwhelming, a crushing weight that threatened to suffocate me. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg for forgiveness, but I was the Glimmering Maw, a creature of darkness, incapable of such emotions. I wandered the woods, lost in my despair, my mind a battleground between my former self and the monster I had become. I longed for release, for an end to the torment. And then I saw her, a young girl, no older than 10, standing at the edge of the woods, her eyes fixed on me. She wasn't afraid. She didn't scream. She just looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and pity. She reminded me of myself, before the transformation, before the darkness consumed me. She was a beacon of hope, a symbol of the innocence that I had lost. I wanted to run, to hide, to escape her gaze. But I couldn't. Something held me back, a strange compulsion, a desperate need for connection. She took a step towards me, her hand outstretched. "Are you lost?" she asked, her voice soft and gentle. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at her, my red eyes burning with a mixture of fear and longing. She took another step closer, her hand still outstretched. "It's okay," she said. "I can help you." And in that moment, something broke within me. The monster began to recede. The darkness began to fade, and a flicker of my former self emerged. I reached out and took her hand, my claws retracting, my skin softening. I looked into her eyes, and I saw a reflection of the man I once was. "Help me," I whispered, my voice hoarse and weak. She smiled, a radiant, hopeful smile. "I will," she said, and together we walked out of the woods, leaving the Glimmering Maw behind. Or so I thought. The transformation wasn't complete. Not really. The darkness still lingered, a shadow in the corners of my mind, a hunger that never truly subsided. I tried to live a normal life, to rebuild what I had lost. I found a job, made friends, and even started a relationship. But the Glimmering Maw was always there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for its chance to return. The waxing gibbous moon became my enemy, a constant reminder of the monster I had become. I dreaded its arrival, fearing the darkness that it would unleash within me. And then, one night, it happened. I was walking home from work, the waxing gibbous moon hanging high in the sky, when I felt the familiar tingling in my skin, the ache in my head, the urge to transform. I tried to fight it, to resist the darkness, but it was too strong. The Glimmering Maw was back, and it was determined to take control. I ran, desperate to escape the transformation, to protect the people I cared about. I ran to the woods, the place where it all began, hoping to find some kind of sanctuary. But there was no escape. The transformation was inevitable. I collapsed to the ground, my body writhing and contorting, my mind consumed by the darkness. I screamed, a sound of pure agony, as the Glimmering Maw took over. And when it was done, I was gone. only the monster remained. I stalked the woods, my red eyes scanning the darkness, my hunger insatiable. I was the glimmering maw, the predator of the night, and I was ready to feed. But then I saw her, the young girl, the one who had helped me escape the woods, the one who had given me hope. She was standing at the edge of the trees, her eyes fixed on me, her face etched with sadness. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. And in that moment, something shifted within me. The monster faltered, the darkness wavered, and a flicker of my former self emerged. I looked at the girl, and I saw the pain that I had caused, the fear that I had instilled. I saw the destruction that I had wrought upon Havenwood, and I knew that I couldn't go on. I couldn't continue to live as the glimmering maw. I had to end it. I turned away from the girl, my body trembling, my mind consumed by a desperate resolve. I ran deeper into the woods, seeking a place where I could be alone, where I could end my torment. I found a clearing, a small, secluded space, surrounded by trees. I stood in the center of the clearing, my eyes fixed on the waxing gibbous moon. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and began to recite the incantation. The incantation to banish the glimmering maw. The words came easily, flowing from my lips with a power and conviction that I had never felt before. As I recited the incantation, I felt the darkness within me begin to recede. The monster began to weaken, and my former self began to reassert itself. The transformation reversed, my body shifting back to its human form, my mind clearing, my soul returning. I finished the incantation, and a wave of energy washed over me, cleansing me of the darkness, banishing the glimmering maw forever. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted but free. I looked up at the waxing gibbous moon, and I felt a sense of peace that I had not known for a long time. I was finally free. But the freedom came at a price. The incantation had banished the glimmering maw, but it had also banished me. I was no longer a part of this world. I was a ghost, a shadow, a memory. I could still see Havenwood, still hear its whispers, still feel its fear, but I could no longer interact with it. I was an observer, a witness, a silent guardian. I watched as the town slowly recovered, as the fear began to fade, as life returned to normal. I watched as the young girl grew up, became a woman, and started a family of her own. And I smiled, knowing that I had done my part, that I had saved Havenwood from the darkness. But I also knew that the darkness would always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to return. And I would always be watching, a silent sentinel, ready to defend Havenwood from the glimmering maw, should it ever rise again. Because I am the glimmering maw, and I am its opposite. I am the protector. I am the light that fights the darkness. I am the hope that never dies. And I will always be here, watching over Havenwood, until the end of time. Except that's not quite how the story ends, is it? Because the truth, the real horror, is that the incantation didn't banish the glimmering maw. It merely fragmented it, scattered its essence, its hunger, its shape-shifting ability, into the very fabric of Havenwood. The town recovered, yes, but it never truly healed. The fear didn't disappear. It simply went dormant, lying in wait, like a virus in remission. And the residents, they carried pieces of the maw within them, unknowingly, unconsciously. That young girl, the one who helped me, she grew up, yes, But she also developed a strange fascination with the moon, with folklore, with the darker aspects of Havenwood's history. She became a librarian, just like Sarah, the one who vanished. And she started collecting books, old books, forgotten books, books that whispered of ancient creatures and lunar cycles. The sheriff, he never truly recovered. He retired, a broken man, haunted by nightmares and whispers. He spent his days locked in his house, staring out the window, convinced that he could see shadows moving in the trees. He became Havenwood's new Silas, the resident conspiracy theorist, warning anyone who would listen about the return of the glimmering maw. And the town itself? It became a breeding ground for strange occurrences, for unexplained phenomena, for whispers and shadows that danced in the corners of your eyes. People started to disappear again, not as frequently as before, but often enough to keep the fear alive. The waxing gibbous moon still casts its eerie light upon Havenwood, and the residents still lock their doors and close their curtains. But they know, deep down, that it's not enough. They know that the glimmering maw is still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to return. Because the truth is, the glimmering maw is not a creature. It's a state of being. It's the darkness that resides within us all, and it will always be with us, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And I, the one who thought he had saved Havenwood, I am now its eternal prisoner. I am bound to this town, forever watching, forever waiting, forever knowing that the darkness will return, because the glimmering maw is not gone. It's just sleeping, and one day, it will wake up, and when it does, Havenwood will burn. You're still here? Then you're ready. The next story is waiting in the dark. Let's begin. The silence was a living thing to Elias Thorne. Not the peaceful, contemplative silence sought by monks and mystics, but a ravenous beast, teeth bared, ready to devour him whole. It was a phobia I'd never encountered in my 20 years as a therapist. A condition so rare, it barely registered in the textbooks. Silephobia, they called it. Fear of silence. Elias was a gaunt man, perpetually on edge, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting an attack from the very air itself. He spoke in rapid bursts, filling every possible void with a torrent of words, often nonsensical, always frantic. The hum of the air conditioner, the ticking of the clock, the distant rumble of traffic, all were his allies, shields against the encroaching void. Our sessions were a cacophony. I'd try to guide him, to delve into the root of his terror, but he'd deflect, his words a frantic dance around the core of his fear. He'd talk about the weather, about politics, about the absurdity of modern art, anything to avoid the dreaded stillness. It's not just quiet, Doctor, he'd stammer, his voice trembling. It's pregnant, full of things, waiting. I tried everything. Cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure therapy, a carefully controlled silence, which ended in a near panic attack, even hypnosis. Nothing worked. The silence held him captive, a prisoner in his own mind. Then, one day, a breakthrough. A flicker of memory. A fleeting image that surfaced during a particularly intense session. A house. A large, old house, shrouded in trees. And a sound. Not silence, but the absence of sound. A void where sound should have been. The house, he whispered, his eyes wide with terror. The house. It was always silent. Too silent. He wouldn't elaborate. The memory, whatever it was too painful, too deeply buried. But it was a start. I knew I had to find that house. I spent weeks researching, piecing together fragments of Elias's fragmented memories. He'd mentioned a small town, nestled in the Appalachian Mountains, a place called Hollow Creek, a town swallowed by the wilderness, forgotten by time. I found it on an old map, a tiny speck of ink in a sea of green. Hollow Creek. Population, unknown. I drove for hours, the landscape growing increasingly desolate. The roads narrowed, the trees closed in, and the air grew heavy with a damp, earthy smell. The sun struggled to penetrate the dense canopy, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the road. As I approached Hollow Creek, I felt a growing sense of unease. The town was deserted. Houses stood empty, their windows like vacant eyes staring out into the wilderness. The only sound was the rustling of leaves and the creaking of branches, a symphony of decay. I found the house on the outskirts of town, perched on a hill overlooking the valley. It was exactly as Elias had described it. Large, old, and shrouded in trees. The paint was peeling, the roof was sagging, and the porch was rotting. It looked like it hadn't been inhabited in decades. As I walked up the overgrown path, I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as if I was being watched. The air was thick with a palpable sense of dread, a feeling of something ancient and malevolent lurking just beneath the surface. I pushed open the front door, which creaked ominously on its hinges. The interior was dark and dusty, the air heavy with the smell of mildew and decay. Cobwebs hung like macabre decorations, and the floorboards groaned under my weight. The silence was deafening. Not the absence of sound, but a thick, suffocating blanket that pressed down on me, stealing my breath. It was the kind of silence that made your ears ring, that made your skin crawl. I walked through the house, room by room, each one more unsettling than the last. The furniture was covered in dust sheets. The walls were stained with damp, and the air was thick with the ghosts of memories. In the living room, I found a child's rocking horse, its paint chipped and faded. In the kitchen, a half-finished cup of tea sat on the table, as if someone had just gotten up and left. In the bedrooms, clothes still hung in the closets, and books lay open on the nightstands. It was as if the inhabitants had simply vanished, leaving everything behind. As I explored the house, I began to feel a growing sense of paranoia. I kept hearing noises, faint whispers, creaking floorboards, the rustling of leaves outside the window. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. I told myself it was just my imagination, the product of the oppressive atmosphere and my own heightened state of anxiety. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing moment. I went down to the basement. The stairs were steep and rickety, and the air grew colder and damper with each step. The basement was dark and damp, the walls lined with stone. The only light came from a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the floor. In the center of the basement, I found a large wooden chest. It was old and ornate, its surface covered in intricate carvings. It was locked. I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. I searched the basement for a key, but I couldn't find one. As I stood there, staring at the chest, I heard a noise, a faint scratching sound, coming from inside the chest. My heart pounded in my chest. I took a step back, my hand reaching for the flashlight in my pocket. The scratching sound grew louder, more insistent. It was followed by a muffled thumping, as if something was trying to get out. I shone the flashlight on the chest. The carvings seemed to writhe and twist in the light, taking on grotesque and menacing shapes. The chest began to shake. The lid rattled, and the lock strained. I knew I had to get out of there. I turned to run, but it was too late. The chest burst open. A figure emerged from the chest. It was tall and gaunt, its skin pale and translucent. Its eyes were black and empty, and its mouth was stretched into a silent scream. It was Elias Thorne. But it wasn't Elias Thorne. It was something else, something ancient and malevolent that had taken his form. It lunged at me, its hands outstretched. I screamed and stumbled backward, tripping over a loose floorboard. I fell to the ground, hitting my head on the stone floor. I lay there, dazed and disoriented, as the figure loomed over me. It reached down and grabbed me by the throat. Its grip was cold and strong, and I felt my breath being cut off. I struggled, kicking and clawing, but it was no use. The figure was too strong. As my vision began to fade, I saw something in the figure's eyes. A flicker of recognition, a hint of humanity. And then, a voice. A faint, whispery voice that seemed to come from inside my own head. The silence, it whispered. It's not empty. It's full of me. Then everything went black. I woke up in my office. The sun was streaming through the window, and the air was filled with the familiar sounds of the city. I was lying on the couch, my head throbbing. I sat up, feeling disoriented and confused. Had it all been a dream? The house, the town, the figure in the basement? I looked around the office, trying to get my bearings. Everything seemed normal. But then I saw something. A small, wooden carving on my desk. It was a miniature replica of the chest I had seen in the basement. My blood ran cold. It hadn't been a dream. It had been real. I picked up the carving, turning it over in my hands. As I did, I noticed something else. A small inscription on the bottom of the chest. It was a single word: silence. I dropped the carving as if it were a burning coal. The silence in the room seemed to intensify, pressing down on me, stealing my breath. I knew then that I was not alone, that the figure from the basement was still with me, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the silence to consume me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The silence had taken my voice. I ran from the office, desperate to escape the suffocating silence. But it followed me, clinging to me like a shroud. I ran through the streets, dodging cars and pedestrians, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. I ended up in a park, surrounded by trees and grass. I collapsed on a bench, gasping for air. The park was filled with people, laughing and talking, but I couldn't hear them. All I could hear was the silence. It was inside me now, a living thing, growing stronger with each passing moment. It was consuming me, erasing my thoughts, stealing my memories. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the darkness. The silence was all there was. And then, I understood. The silence wasn't just a fear. It was a prison built of trauma, of repressed memories, of unspeakable horrors. Elias Thorne hadn't just been afraid of the silence. He had been trapped inside it. And now, so was I. The house in Hollow Creek wasn't just a house. It was a vessel, a conduit for something ancient and malevolent. Something that fed on silence, on the absence of sound, on the void where memories should have been. Elias's trauma wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was an invitation, a doorway for this entity to enter our world. And I, in my arrogance, in my desire to help, had opened that door. The scratching in the chest wasn't just a sound. It was a plea, a desperate attempt to break free from the prison of silence. But the silence was too strong. It had consumed Elias, and now it was consuming me. I opened my eyes, and the park was gone. The trees, the grass, the people, all vanished. I was standing in the basement of the house in Hollow Creek, the figure looming over me. It smiled, a grotesque and terrifying smile that revealed rows of sharp, jagged teeth. "Welcome home," it whispered. The silence closed in, and I knew that I was lost forever. That was the story I would have written. The chilling tale of Elias Thorne and the house in Hollow Creek. But that's not the story I'm living. Not exactly. The truth is far more insidious, far more personal. Elias Thorne was never my patient. Hollow Creek doesn't exist. The house is a figment of my imagination, a construct of my own repressed memories. I am Elias Thorne. The xylophobia isn't a phobia at all. It's a symptom of a trauma so profound, so horrific, that my mind has erected a wall of silence to protect itself. The silence isn't empty. It's filled with the echoes of a scream that I can't quite hear, a scream that I'm desperately trying to suppress. I remember the house now, not as a therapist, but as a child living in a remote, isolated house in the Appalachian Mountains. The house was always silent, too silent. My parents were distant, preoccupied. They spoke in hushed tones, their faces etched with worry. I spent my days exploring the woods, trying to escape the oppressive silence of the house. But the silence followed me, clinging to me like a shadow. One day, I found the chest in the basement. It was locked, but I managed to pry it open. Inside, I found something that shattered my world. Something that I can't quite remember, but that I know was unspeakably terrible. A scream. That's all I remember. A long, piercing scream that echoed through the house, shattering the silence. And then, nothing. Just a void. A blank space where the memory should have been. My mind has filled that void with silence. A protective barrier. A shield against the horror that lies buried beneath. But the silence is cracking. The memories are starting to surface, like bubbles rising from the depths of a dark and murky lake. I see flashes of images, a dark room, a figure looming over me, a glint of metal. I hear whispers, a child's voice, pleading for help, a guttural growl, promising pain. I feel emotions, terror, despair, a bone-chilling sense of helplessness. The silence is no longer a shield. It's a prison that I've built for myself, a prison that's slowly collapsing around me. I know that I have to confront the truth. I have to delve into the darkness, to face the horror that I've been running from for so long. But I'm afraid. Afraid of what I'll find. Afraid of what I'll become. The figure in the basement isn't just a figment of my imagination. It's a part of me. A dark, twisted part that I've been trying to suppress. And it's getting stronger. It's feeding on my fear, on my denial, on the silence that I've created. I can feel it now, lurking in the shadows of my mind, waiting for the moment to take control. I'm sitting in my office, the silence pressing down on me. The city sounds are muffled, distant, as if I'm underwater. I look at my reflection in the window. My face is pale and gaunt, my eyes wide with terror. I see the figure standing behind me, its hand reaching out. I close my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. The silence is all there is. And then, a scream. My scream. It echoes through the office, shattering the silence. And in that moment, I remember. The chest, the basement, the figure. It wasn't a monster. It was my father. The glint of metal wasn't a weapon. It was a scalpel. The scream wasn't just a scream. It was a cry for help. My father was a surgeon, a brilliant, respected surgeon. But he was also a monster. He performed experiments on me. Unspeakable experiments that left me scarred, both physically and emotionally. He silenced me. He stole my voice, my memories, my innocence. He turned me into a prisoner in my own mind. The xylophobia isn't a phobia. It's a defense mechanism. A way for my mind to protect itself from the horror of what happened. But the silence can't protect me anymore. The memories are too strong. They're flooding back, overwhelming me. I'm drowning in the darkness, suffocating in the silence. I open my eyes, and I'm standing in the basement of the house in Hollow Creek. My father is standing in front of me, his eyes cold and empty. He smiles, a grotesque and terrifying smile. "Welcome home, Elias," he says. And then, he raises the scalpel. The scream is trapped in my throat, unable to escape. The silence is all there is. But this time, it's not a prison. It's a release. A release from the pain, from the fear, from the horror. I close my eyes, and I let go. The silence consumes me, and I am finally free. Or am I? Perhaps the silence is not the end. Perhaps it's just the beginning. Perhaps the house in Hollow Creek is not just a figment of my imagination. Perhaps it's a gateway to another world. A world of silence and darkness, where the monsters of our past wait to claim us. And perhaps, just perhaps, I'm not the only one who's trapped in that world. Perhaps there are others, lost souls who have been silenced by trauma, who are waiting for someone to find them. And perhaps, one day, I will find them. And together, we will break the silence. Or perhaps, we will simply become part of it. The silence is waiting. Are you listening? Another story gone, but no sleep yet. Maybe this next one will be the reason you can't close your eyes at all. The air hung thick and stagnant, a cloying miasma of dust, mildew, and something else. Something metallic, like old blood. The beam of my headlamp cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing only a small circle of crumbling tile and rusted metal. Above, the arched ceiling of the abandoned subway station disappeared into an impenetrable blackness. We called ourselves urban explorers, but really, we were thrill seekers, drawn to the forbidden and the forgotten. Tonight's prize, the abandoned Seneca station, rumored to be haunted by the ghosts of the 1940 train crash. A tragedy that claimed over 100 lives, a stain on the city's history they tried to bury, literally, beneath the streets. The others, Mark, Sarah, and Ben, were somewhere behind me, their own lights bobbing like fireflies in the gloom. I could hear their muffled voices, a nervous chatter that did little to dispel the unease that had settled in my stomach the moment we'd squeezed through the gap in the boarded-up entrance. I wasn't a believer in ghosts, not really. But Seneca Station, it felt different. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a low, almost imperceptible hum, a constant thrumming that resonated deep within my bones. I pushed forward, my boots crunching on the debris-strewn platform. Graffiti, faded and peeling, covered the walls. Grotesque figures, cryptic symbols, and the recurring phrase, "Don't look back." A shiver ran down my spine. It was just vandalism, I told myself, the work of bored teenagers. But the message felt, pointed. The platform stretched out before me, disappearing into the darkness of the tunnel. The tracks, rusted and overgrown with weeds, gleamed faintly in the beam of my light. I could almost hear the rumble of a train, The screech of brakes. The screams. "Hey, Liam! Wait up!" Mark's voice echoed through the station, breaking the spell. I turned, relieved to see the others catching up. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, was already snapping photos with her digital camera. Ben, the group's resident historian, was poring over a tattered map he'd found online. "Anything interesting?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Ben looked up, his face pale in the flickering light. "This map, it's old, really old. It shows tunnels that aren't on any modern maps. Tunnels that lead deeper." "Deeper where?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with skepticism. Ben shrugged. "I don't know, but the map marks this station as a nexus point." "A nexus point?" I repeated, a knot of unease tightening in my chest. "Yeah, a place where things converge." I didn't like the sound of that. "Let's just stick to the main platform, okay? We can take some pictures, maybe find some old artifacts, and then get out of here." The others agreed, though I could sense a flicker of disappointment in their eyes. They wanted the thrill, the danger. I just wanted to get out of this place with my sanity intact. We explored the platform, taking pictures of the decaying infrastructure. The air grew colder, the hum more pronounced. I kept glancing over my shoulder, a feeling of being watched prickling at the back of my neck. Then we heard it. A faint whisper, carried on the stagnant air. It sounded like a voice, but distorted, garbled, like someone speaking through a broken radio. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The others nodded, their faces etched with apprehension. "What was it?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," I said, "but I don't like it." The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from the tunnel, from the darkness beyond the platform. "Let's go," I said, my voice trembling. "Let's get out of here." But as we turned to leave, the lights flickered and died, plunging us into absolute darkness. Panic seized me. I fumbled for my flashlight, my fingers clumsy and numb. Finally, I found it and switched it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing. The others were gone. "Mark! Sarah! Ben!" I called out, my voice cracking with fear. Only silence answered me. I spun around, my light darting frantically from side to side. The platform was empty. They couldn't have just vanished. "This isn't funny!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the station. Still, no answer. I was alone. The whispering intensified, swirling around me like a vortex. It was no longer just a garbled murmur. I could almost make out words, fragments of sentences, whispers of pain and despair. "Help us! Don't look! It's coming!" My heart pounded in my chest. I had to get out of here. I started to run, my boots pounding on the concrete platform. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to escape the whispering, the darkness, the oppressive feeling of being watched. I ran blindly, my light beam bouncing erratically, until I reached the end of the platform. Before me lay the tunnel, a gaping maw of darkness that seemed to swallow the light. I hesitated. I didn't want to go into the tunnel, but I couldn't stay here. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the darkness. The temperature dropped instantly, a wave of icy air washing over me. The whispering intensified, becoming a cacophony of voices, a chorus of suffering. I pressed on, my light beam cutting through the darkness, revealing the tunnel walls. Damp, moss-covered, and covered in the same grotesque graffiti I'd seen on the platform. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, a never-ending corridor of darkness and despair. I could feel the weight of the station pressing down on me. The weight of the tragedy that had occurred here. The weight of the ghosts that haunted this place. Then, I saw it. A light, flickering in the distance. Hope surged through me. Someone else was here. Maybe it was Mark, Sarah, or Ben. Maybe I wasn't alone after all. I ran towards the light, my heart pounding with anticipation. As I drew closer, I could see that the light was coming from a doorway, a small opening in the tunnel wall. I reached the doorway and peered inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a room. It was something else. A space that defied description. A place where the laws of physics seemed to have been twisted and broken. The walls were not walls, but shifting, swirling masses of color and light. The floor was not solid, but a shimmering, iridescent surface that seemed to ripple and undulate beneath my feet. And in the center of this impossible space, there was a train. But it wasn't like any train I had ever seen. It was twisted and distorted, its metal warped and corroded, its windows shattered and filled with darkness. It looked like a train that had been through hell and back. And inside the train, there were figures. They were pale and gaunt, their eyes hollow and black. They were dressed in tattered clothes, their bodies contorted in unnatural positions. They were the ghosts of the 1948 train crash. They turned to me, their eyes burning with a cold, malevolent light. They reached out to me, their skeletal fingers grasping, beckoning me to join them. I screamed and stumbled back, my mind reeling in horror. This wasn't just a haunted subway station. It was a gateway to something. Something terrible. I turned and ran, back into the tunnel, away from the train, away from the ghosts, away from the impossible space. I ran until my lungs burned, and my legs ached until I could no longer hear the whispering, until I could no longer feel the weight of the station pressing down on me. Finally, I collapsed, gasping for breath, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. I lay there for a long time, trying to regain my composure, trying to convince myself that what I had seen was just a hallucination, a product of my overactive imagination. But I knew it wasn't. I knew that what I had seen was real, and I knew that I was not alone. I could feel it, a presence lurking in the darkness, watching me, waiting for me. I slowly sat up, my hand reaching for my flashlight. I switched it on, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. And then I saw it. Standing in the tunnel, just beyond the reach of my light, was a figure. It was tall and gaunt, its body shrouded in darkness. Its face was hidden, but I could feel its eyes, burning into me, piercing my soul. It raised a hand, its skeletal fingers beckoning me to come closer. I froze, paralyzed with fear. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. The figure took a step forward, moving into the light. And then I saw its face. It was my face. But it wasn't me. It was a twisted, distorted version of me, a reflection of my darkest fears and desires. It smiled, a cruel, mocking smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Come," it whispered, its voice a hollow echo of my own. "Join us." I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I was trapped, caught in its gaze, unable to break free. It took another step forward, reaching out to me, its skeletal fingers brushing against my skin. And then, everything went black. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I finally came to, I was lying on the platform, the cold concrete pressing against my cheek. The station was silent, the whispering gone. The air was still thick and stagnant, but the oppressive feeling of being watched had lifted. I slowly sat up, my body aching, my head throbbing. I looked around, but I was alone. The others were still gone. I stood up, my legs wobbly, and started to walk towards the entrance. I had to get out of here. As I walked, I noticed something on the ground. A small, tattered piece of paper. I picked it up and unfolded it. It was a map, the same map that Ben had been studying earlier. But this map was different. It showed the tunnels, the hidden tunnels that weren't on any modern maps, and it marked Seneca Station as a nexus point. But there was something else on the map, something that hadn't been there before. A symbol, a strange, cryptic symbol that I didn't recognize. As I stared at the symbol, a wave of nausea washed over me. My head began to spin, and I felt like I was going to faint. I dropped the map and stumbled towards the entrance, desperate to escape the station. I reached the gap in the boarded-up entrance and squeezed through, emerging into the cool night air. I stood there for a moment, gasping for breath, trying to regain my composure. I had made it. I was out. But as I turned to leave, I glanced back at the station. And then I saw it. Standing in the darkness, just inside the entrance, was a figure. It was tall and gaunt, its body shrouded in darkness. Its face was hidden, but I could feel its eyes, burning into me, piercing my soul. It raised a hand, its skeletal fingers beckoning me to come closer. It was me, but it wasn't me. It was a twisted, distorted version of me, a reflection of my darkest fears and desires. It smiled, a cruel, mocking smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "You can't escape," it whispered, its voice a hollow echo of my own. "You're one of us now." I turned and ran, as fast as I could, away from the station, away from the figure, away from the darkness. I ran until I reached my apartment, until I slammed the door shut and locked it, until I collapsed on my bed, trembling with fear. I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it was all just a dream, a nightmare. But I knew it wasn't. I knew that what I had seen was real, and I knew that I was not safe. I could feel it, a presence lurking in the shadows, watching me, waiting for me. It was inside me now, a part of me, a darkness that I could never escape. I am writing this now, in the flickering light of my desk lamp, hoping that someone will find it, hoping that someone will understand. But I know that no one will, because I am alone, and I am haunted. The whispering has started again. It's faint, barely audible, but it's there. "Come," it whispers. "Join us." I can feel it getting closer, the darkness closing in. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to stop it. I am losing my mind. I think it's time to go back. Back to Seneca Station. Back to the darkness. Back to myself. I can hear the train now, the rumble of its wheels on the tracks, the screech of its brakes. It's waiting for me, and I am ready. I am one of them now. Don't look back. Another story gone, but no sleep yet. Maybe this next one will be the reason you can't close your eyes at all. The scalpel felt cold, almost accusing, in my hand. Outside, the wind howled like a banshee, rattling the boarded-up windows of the Blackwood Sanatorium. Inside, the sterile chill of the operating theater was a stark contrast to the feverish excitement burning in my veins. Tonight, I would rewrite the very definition of memory. Tonight, I would become a god. For years, I, Dr. Alistair Reed, had dedicated my life to unlocking the secrets of the human mind. My colleagues called me obsessed, reckless even. They scoffed at my theories, dismissed my research as fantastical. But I knew I was on the verge of something monumental, something that would eclipse all previous medical breakthroughs. The memory graft. A procedure to transplant memories from one mind to another. Blackwood, abandoned for decades after a series of unfortunate incidents, was the perfect sanctuary for my work. Its isolation guaranteed secrecy, and its history, steeped in whispers of madness and experimental procedures, added a perverse thrill to my endeavor. The generator sputtered and coughed, casting long, dancing shadows across the room, illuminating the rows of dusty surgical instruments and the imposing figure of the surgical chair. I looked at my reflection in the polished steel of the operating lamp. My eyes were bloodshot, my face gaunt. Sleep had become a luxury I could no longer afford, but the exhaustion was a small price to pay for the potential that lay before me. The first phase was complete. The donor matrix, a complex algorithm I had painstakingly developed, was ready. It would act as a conduit, a bridge between my mind and the memories I sought to acquire. I had chosen myself as the subject. Vanity? Perhaps. But also necessity. I needed to experience the process firsthand, to understand its nuances, its potential pitfalls. I had prepared a cocktail of anesthetics and neural inhibitors, enough to dull the pain, but not enough to completely obliterate consciousness. I wanted to be aware, to witness the transformation as it unfolded. As I injected the cocktail into my arm, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The room began to spin, the shadows deepened, and the wind outside seemed to intensify its mournful cry. I strapped myself into the chair, the leather cold and unforgiving against my skin. "For science," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the roar in my ears. "For progress." I activated the matrix. A low hum filled the room, emanating from the intricate network of wires and electrodes that surrounded me. The hum grew louder, resonating in my bones, vibrating in my teeth. A blinding white light erupted from the matrix, engulfing me in its incandescent embrace. Then, darkness. When I awoke, the light was gone. The hum had subsided. The only sound was the relentless howling of the wind. I felt different. Lighter, somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from my soul. I ran a hand through my hair, and a jolt of unfamiliar memory surged through me. A sun-drenched beach, the taste of salt on my lips, the laughter of children playing in the waves. A memory that was not mine. Excitement surged through me. The procedure had worked. The Matrix had successfully transferred a memory. But whose? And how many more were lurking within the depths of my mind? I stumbled out of the chair, my legs unsteady. I needed to analyze the data, to understand the parameters of the transfer. I made my way to the makeshift laboratory I had set up in the old records room. The room was cluttered with equipment, stacks of notes, and half-empty coffee cups. I sat down at the computer and began to sift through the data logs. The Matrix had recorded a multitude of neural signatures, each corresponding to a different memory fragment. As I delved deeper into the data, a sense of unease began to creep over me. The memories were not coherent, not linear. They were fragmented, distorted, like pieces of a shattered mirror. And they were disturbing. A flash of a dark, damp cell, the stench of decay, the sound of rats scurrying in the shadows, a glimpse of a blood-stained knife, a scream cut short, a pair of eyes filled with terror. These were not the memories of a peaceful life. These were the memories of something else. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps the Matrix had picked up stray neural signals from the sanatorium itself. Blackwood had a dark history. A history of suffering and despair. It was possible that the walls themselves held echoes of the past. But as the days turned into nights, the memories grew stronger, more vivid, more insistent. They invaded my thoughts, disrupted my sleep, blurred the line between reality and nightmare. I would be walking down the hallway, and suddenly I would find myself in a crowded marketplace, surrounded by unfamiliar faces, the air thick with the smell of spices and sweat. I would be examining a surgical instrument, and a vision of a battlefield would flash before my eyes. The ground littered with corpses, the air filled with the cries of the wounded. The memories were not just visual. They were tactile, olfactory, emotional. I could feel the cold steel of the knife in my hand, smell the stench of decay in the cell, feel the terror in the eyes of the victim. I started to lose track of time. Days bled into nights. Reality blurred into hallucination. I no longer knew who I was, what I was. Was I still Alistair Reed, the brilliant surgeon? Or was I a vessel, a repository for the fragmented memories of countless unknown individuals? The sanatorium itself seemed to be feeding on my madness. The shadows deepened, the whispers grew louder. The creaking floorboards sounded like footsteps following me down the hallway. I felt like I was being watched, constantly observed by unseen eyes. One night, I awoke to find myself standing in the operating theater, the scalpel in my hand. I had no memory of getting there. The surgical chair was empty, but I could have sworn I saw a fleeting shadow disappear behind it. Paranoia consumed me. I barricaded myself in the laboratory, surrounded by my notes and equipment, desperately trying to find a way to stop the memories from overwhelming me. I discovered a pattern in the neural signatures. The memories were not random. They were connected, linked by a common thread. A thread of violence, of suffering, of unspeakable horror. I realized that the Matrix had not simply transferred memories. It had opened a gateway, a portal to something else. Something dark, something ancient, something that had been lurking in the shadows of the human psyche for centuries. The sanatorium was not just a building, it was a conduit, a focal point for this entity. The experiments that had been conducted here, the suffering that had been endured, had created a psychic resonance, a vortex that drew in the darkness. And I, in my arrogance, in my pursuit of knowledge, had unwittingly unleashed it. The whispers grew louder, coalescing into voices. Voices that spoke in a language I did not understand, yet somehow comprehended. Voices that promised power, knowledge, immortality. Voices that demanded sacrifice. I looked at my reflection in the computer screen. My eyes were no longer my own. They were filled with a cold, malevolent light. My face was contorted in a grotesque parody of a smile. I was no longer Alistair Reed. I was something else. Something more. The voices told me what I had to do. I had to complete the process, to fully integrate the memories, to become one with the entity. And to do that, I needed a vessel. I stumbled out of the laboratory, drawn by an irresistible force. I made my way to the old morgue, a cold, damp room filled with the stench of formaldehyde. The bodies were still there, preserved in their refrigerated drawers. The victims of Blackwood's dark past. Waiting. The voices told me which one to choose. A young woman, her face frozen in a silent scream. She was perfect. I dragged her body out of the drawer and onto the autopsy table. The scalpel felt warm in my hand, almost eager. As I began to cut, a flicker of my former self resurfaced. A moment of clarity, a spark of humanity. I saw what I was doing, what I had become, and I was horrified. But it was too late. The entity had taken control. My body was a puppet, my mind a prisoner. I continued to cut, to dissect, to prepare the vessel for the final integration. The voices grew louder, more insistent, urging me on. As I reached the brain, a final surge of resistance coursed through me. I fought against the entity, desperately trying to regain control. I managed to wrest control of my hand for a split second. I raised the scalpel and plunged it into my own chest. The pain was excruciating, but it was also liberating. As the darkness closed in, I felt the entity recoil, its grip on my mind weakening. I collapsed onto the floor, the scalpel clattering beside me. The voices faded, the shadows receded, the sanatorium fell silent. I lay there, bleeding, dying, but free. Or so, I thought. As my vision blurred, I saw a figure emerge from the shadows. A figure that looked like me. But it wasn't me. It was the entity, fully formed, wearing my face like a mask. It smiled, a chilling, inhuman smile. "Thank you, Alistair," it said, its voice a chorus of 1,000 screams. "You have opened the door. Now, we can finally begin." It stepped over my body and walked out of the morgue into the darkness. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was not the end. It was only the beginning of a new era of horror, an era where the boundaries between reality and nightmare were shattered, and the darkness reigned supreme. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was alone, trapped in the darkness, with the knowledge that I had unleashed something terrible upon the world. And as the darkness consumed me, I heard the whispers again. Whispers that promised power, knowledge, immortality. Whispers that beckoned me to join them. Whispers that told me that I was not dead. Not yet. I awoke. The cold, sterile chill of the operating theater pressed against my skin. The wind still howled outside, a mournful dirge against the boarded-up windows of Blackwood Sanatorium. The generator sputtered, casting long, dancing shadows. I was strapped into the surgical chair. The leather was cold and unforgiving. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. Had it all been a dream? A nightmare induced by exhaustion and paranoia? I looked around the room, searching for any sign of what had transpired. But everything was as I had left it. The surgical instruments neatly arranged, the matrix humming softly in the corner. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. It was just a dream, I told myself. A vivid, terrifying dream. But as I reached for the release mechanism on the chair, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A glint of metal on the floor. I looked down. There, lying beside the chair, was a scalpel. Covered in blood. My blood. A wave of nausea washed over me. I remembered the pain, the struggle, the entity taking control. It wasn't a dream. It was real. But how? How could I be alive? How could I be back in the chair? Then I heard the whispers, faint at first, but growing louder with each passing moment. "Welcome back, Alistair," they said. "We have so much to show you." I looked up. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, to coalesce into shapes. Shapes that were vaguely human, but twisted and distorted, like reflections in a funhouse mirror. The shapes began to move, to dance, to surround me. Their eyes burned with a cold, malevolent light. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was paralyzed, trapped in the chair, at the mercy of the entity. It was then that I noticed the Matrix. It was glowing with an unnatural light, pulsating with energy. The entity was still connected to me. The process was not complete. And as the shapes closed in, as the whispers grew louder, as the Matrix began to hum, I realized the horrifying truth. I was not back in the chair. I had never left. The entity had simply rewound time, erased the memory of my death, and started the process all over again. I was trapped in a loop, a never-ending cycle of horror, destined to relive my own demise for eternity. And with each iteration, the entity would grow stronger, more powerful, more in control, until finally, there would be nothing left of Alistair Reed. Only the entity. And as the darkness consumed me once more, I heard the whispers again. Whispers that promised power, knowledge, immortality. Whispers that told me that this time, it would be different. Whispers that lied. I awoke. The cold, sterile chill. We've reached the end. Maybe you're still wide awake. Or maybe the stories carried you closer to sleep. Either way, thank you for staying with me. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next night of horror. Good night. Or good morning.